Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Tommy Brzee. It is Tuesday, April 16th, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about some top 100 players list that was dropped by CBS yesterday. Wanted to break that down for you guys and see what teams are kind of dominating the top 100 in terms of the best players in the country. Then we're going to get back to spring game takeaways. Weren't able to really finish yesterday, so wanted to break down a couple more for you to hear today. Then we have another CBS centered segment. We have Chris Hummer dropped his transfer portal superlatives. Wanted to break that down for you guys. Some teams to watch, some positions to watch, and some even players to watch throughout this next couple of weeks. And then we'll get into another Top 10 Tuesday, and I will take a whack at the best 10 players in the country. This is not an easy thing to do, so spare me a little bit. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the air, get me to see it, and I can respond to it, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to watch and have kind of an interactive experience here, which is fun for both of us. But let's jump right in. Let's talk about this top 100 list that came out from CBS yesterday. And it was Blake Brockermeyer that dropped it. If that last name sounds familiar, he is the father of Tommy and James Brockermeyer. James is currently set to be the starter at center for Bama, kind of beating out Parker Brailsford right now in that battle. And then Tommy Brockermeyer is heading into his second year at TCU after transferring over from Bama. Their father, Blake, is a remarkable college football player, was an All-American while he was there, and spent some time in the NFL. So obviously someone that knows football quite a bit, and he dropped his top 100 list. He does this quite a bit throughout the offseason, but his post-spring one is officially live, and it has some ers and ahs in there that I do not agree with. There's some that I totally agree with, to be totally honest with you, but just to give you an idea of what we're working with here. So he started it off with Travis Hunter, which is kind of hard to argue with, to be totally honest with you. I mean, when you look at that kid on both sides of the ball, he's one of the best players on both sides of the ball in the entire country. So it's pretty remarkable when that happens. He's obviously one of the best athletes in the country, so totally understand why he's his number one. He is not my number one, but you'll have to stay tuned to get my top 10. I'll kind of keep a little bit under wraps what I have so we can keep some intrigue going into the last day. But as you see here, Colorado does have two of the top four players in the entire country when you talk about Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders, according to Blake Brockermeyer, but they only have one more player in the entire top 100, which is BJ Green, an Arizona State transfer who's at 77. So this Colorado team has talent. There's no doubt about it. Those two guys lead the way, but they lead the way by a pretty comfortable margin, to be totally honest with you. And if you've been watching the transfer portal news the last couple of days, they've been losing guys pretty much left and right. So I'll break that down later in the week, I believe. Have a show probably at the end of the week, likely going into Colorado and kind of the situation happening right there right now. But for the time being, it really does look like it's Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, and everyone else pretty much on that team. So not necessarily a way to win a conference title or to do the things that Dion definitely wants to do this year, but still plenty of talent between those two, and as long as they can keep those two clean, especially Shedeur Sanders, they might have a shot to make some noise. But you have James Pierce Jr. at number 2 in the country. I think that makes sense. He's an absolute force on the defensive side of the ball for Tennessee, a guy that broke onto the scene last year, but is only going to keep getting better. He can put on a little bit more weight. He can get a little bit more nuance with his pass rush, even though it's already pretty great, to be totally honest with you. But definitely an absolute force there and gives Tennessee a huge upside on that defensive side of the ball. Another guy, another D lineman there, Mason Graham here at 3. I think that makes total sense as well. An absolute force on the inside. Someone who's going to have to fill some pretty big shoes this upcoming year, but has the ability to and is going to be one of, if not the best defensive tackle in the entire country. We talked about Shedeur Sanders already, but at number 5, we have Luther Burden, the first wide receiver on this board, and it makes sense why he's here. It does look a little bit interesting with him above guys like Jalen Milroe and Carson Beck and some of these other guys, but Luther Burden's an absolute game changer. If you watch Missouri last year pretty much at all, you saw him make a pretty remarkable play, I'm sure. So he's someone that totally changes the complexion of that team, totally changes the way that Brady Cook is able to look in that offense, because there are certain players that just elevate the people around him, and Luther Burden's one of those guys. That wide receiver room does not lack for talent even behind him, but Luther Burden really is what makes that all go, makes everyone kind of fall into their right position, and it makes everything work. So he's an absolute game changer. Makes sense why he's up there. And then you have your first offensive lineman here with Will Campbell from LSU at 6. He is the best offensive tackle in the country, in my opinion, an absolute game changer for LSU, and someone that I'm sure Garrett Nussmeier is very, very glad to have at left tackle, because it could be a very long year if he didn't have him at left tackle, and also Emory Jones, who's on this list as well. Actually, we'll get to him here in a second, but a very talented kid that absolutely could be number one off the board next year, depending on how things fall with the NFL draft. But then you get to some quarterbacks here. You have Jalen Milroe and then Carson Beck at 7 and 8. And to be totally honest, I would have these flipped. You'll see later on where I have these guys. But at the end of the day, I understand why he has Milroe this high. He's a guy that has not hit his ceiling yet, has the ability to even grow much more as a passer, I think, and even as, a runner. I think there's a lot of ability there, obviously, to start with, but I think that can only grow, to be totally honest with you. So I think Jalen Milroe has the ability to be one of the best, if not the best quarterback in the entire country. I would just give Carson Beck the slight edge right now, but Milroe's 1-0 against him, so I can't necessarily argue with that. But Carson Beck, right after him, an absolute surgical passer, a dude that is going to sit in the pocket and pretty much pick you apart with no problem. Totally understand why he's here. I think he's someone that is going to light the world on fire this year. I think a Heisman is maybe in the cards for him, so we'll see what happens there. And then he has Ollie Gordon at 9, which I was a little bit surprised about. I won't lie to you. I thought running backs would be a little bit further down the list, but Ollie Gordon was an absolute difference maker last year. He was the reason that Oklahoma State was as good as they were in a year where a lot of people tabbed them to be one of the worst teams in the entire Big 12. They made it to the Big 12 championship. Obviously didn't go their way in that game, but at the end of the day, Ollie Gordon not on that team, Oklahoma State's season looks a lot different. But then finally, they get to a player that Ollie Gordon faced off against in that Big 12 championship, in Kelvin Banks from Texas. This is a kid that, a lot like Will Campbell, started his freshman year and has only gotten better since then. I think everyone expects him to be one of the top 10 picks maybe in next year, definitely a first-round pick next year. As long as he can stay healthy, he is going to be an absolute huge player for Texas. And I expect him and Will Campbell, honestly, to be the tackles on the All-American team. But we'll see how that shakes out as the season goes on, obviously. But I'll take my whack at the top 10 later on in the show. So just so you know, I thought Shedeur being the top quarterback was a little bit surprising, to be totally honest with you. I thought Shedeur was not necessarily what I would put at number 1. I think I had him at number 4 when I ranked quarterbacks earlier in the year. But I totally understand why he has him there. He's an absolute difference maker. His ceiling is maybe higher than the rest of these guys, so I totally understand that. And then Ollie Gordon in top 10, I kind of talked about it. Was a little bit surprised about that as well. But let's get to some teams that kind of dominated this. As you see, you don't have any Ohio State players in the top 10. Well, that didn't necessarily hurt them in getting the most amount of players in the top 100. They had 7 different players in the top 100, and it started off at number 12 with Quinshon Judkins. And if you see those asterisks next to names, oh, well, I missed one with Isaiah Bond. But those are some transfer players that have joined some other teams. So Quinshon Judkins was a big-time pickup for them. He's at number 12 on this list. Caleb Downs down at 19. Jack Sawyer, Emeka Egbuka, Travion Henderson, Denzel Burke, and Seth McLaughlin, the guy that transferred over from Alabama after not the greatest performance necessarily in the playoff games, but at the end of the day, a very talented kid that has the ability to be a big-time player for Ohio State this year. Then you followed up with Oregon, a team that used the transfer portal definitely in their favor. I missed one with Evan Stewart as well, so maybe this wasn't the best idea in the world, but You have Dylan Gabriel to start it off at number 20, then Evan Stewart, who was a transfer at 22. Malik Muhammad, Jamari Caldwell, also transfers that were big time for them. Jamari Caldwell is a guy that I think a lot of people will know the name very, very quickly as we get into this year. Then you have Tez Johnson and Josh Connerly. Josh Connerly is a guy that kind of like Kelvin Banks and Will Campbell, have only gotten better throughout their time. A guy that can be an absolute difference maker for them and makes life a lot easier for someone like Dylan Gabriel, who needs a little bit of time to kind of put everything together on the offensive side of the ball, and protection will help him immensely with that. So, but moving on down the list, we have a ton of teams stuck in 5. We have Texas, Georgia, Bama, and Ole Miss. But let's start with Texas, and let's talk about. We already talked about Kelvin Banks a little bit. He was the one that cracked the top 10 in this one. But Isaiah Bond right after him. You had Ewers literally right after Isaiah Bond at 15, and then you had C.J. Baxter and Trey Moore, a transfer from UTSA at edge rusher at 85 to round this out. So obviously 2 huge pickups there in the transfer portal with Isaiah Bond and Trey Moore. But obviously this is a very talented team. I was a little surprised CJ Baxter was on this list, to be totally honest with you, but a very talented kid that can do a ton of really, really remarkable things this year. But let's move on down to Georgia. We already talked about Carson Beck in the top 10. You had Malachi Starks, who I think could be a little bit higher on this list, to be totally honest with you. You have Tate Ratledge, Michael Williams, and Dylan Bell to finish it out. So a very talented group. All their top 5 guys are in the top 75. So obviously a remarkable group over there in Athens, Georgia, as there always is. But moving on to Alabama, Jalen Milroe we already touched on. Tyler Booker was the next on this list, which makes sense. An absolute force on the offensive line. That is going to be one of the best players in the country this upcoming year. You had Malachi Moore. You had Jaden Roberts, who's the other guard on this team, across from Tyler Booker. So that offensive line, at least interior-wise, is going to be an absolute force. We talked about James Brockermeyer earlier. It sounds like those 3 are the interior guys, and that's quite the 3 to have for run blocking and things of that nature on the interior side of the ball. And then you have Deontay Lawson to finish it out at 84. But Ole Miss got a ton of help with this new transfer portal rules and everything, and the big-time players that came in. They got 2 top 50 players in Walter Nolan and Princely Umanmielen. I think both those guys are big-time players for them this upcoming year. You had Trey Harris to start it off at 23. I think he's definitely the best player on this team. Jackson Dart, and then Caden Prieskorn. And I think the biggest thing here is the 3 guys that were already on this team that are in the top 100 are offensive players. The other 2 that they had to pick up through the portal are defensive. So you see the deficiencies that needed to be filled, and you see that Lane Kiffin has done a really good job in filling them, at least with the top-end talent that they absolutely need. And then we got 3 teams towards the bottom here with 4 players across the top 100. We'll start with Michigan. Mason Graham, we talked about, one of the best players in the country. A guy that just missed the top 10, Will Johnson, is an absolute game changer on the outside. Colston Loveland is one of, if not the best tight end in the entire country. I think him and Mitchell Evans are really vying for that top spot next year in the draft. And then Kenneth Grant, a guy that is going to be right next to Mason Graham this upcoming year, and a duo that I think could be as dominant as the Texas duo Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy were last year. So would be an absolute huge boost for Michigan, especially on that defensive side of the ball, and would give their quarterback a little bit of time to get his footing at least while they hold teams to under 10 points probably the majority of the time. But let's finish it off with LSU and Miami. LSU, we talked about Will Campbell. He's a game changer. Harold Perkins was a little bit misused last year, to be totally honest, but is still very, very talented. He comes in at 16. You had Mason Taylor at 48, the tight end that is an absolute beast. And then Emory Jones, the other tackle on this team, at 61. So 2 incredibly talented tackles on this team, both in the top 100 for LSU. Gives Garrett Nussmeier a very good peace of mind as he heads into the season. And then Miami to finish it out. They started a little bit later in this list with Cam Ward coming in at 30, being their first guy. But Ruben Bain was very shortly after him at 33. I honestly think he could be even higher on this list as the season goes on. You had Xavier Restrepo at 62, and then Francis Mauanoa, the very talented tackle, at 98. So this is a very talented team in Miami. I think they've done a remarkably good job of building up that team since Mario Cristobal has gotten there, but it's time to start delivering, right? Coral Gables is definitely a place that they expect to be competing for trophies and be in the conversation for quite some time. So it'll be really interesting to see all that unfold and see what kind of happens as the season goes on for Miami in particular among these teams. But overall, this is a very, very interesting list. I think one of the things that really stood out to me as I kind of went through it was there are really talented players all over this country. We talked about Ricky White yesterday. He was on this list, the UNLV wide receiver that is going to get quite a few offers in this transfer portal window, if I had to imagine. And then you also had Torrey Horton Jr., excuse me, from Colorado State, another wide receiver that's an absolute difference maker. So you see that while, probably the next 200 people on this list would have been, Power 5 type players, there are really talented players all over the country, guys that can get drafted in the next level and make big time differences for their franchises pretty much right away. So I think this is a group that obviously, there's so much energy put towards the SEC, the Big Ten, the big dogs of college football, but there's plenty of talent all over the country. And if you just, every couple of weekends, tune into UNLV or tune into Colorado State or tune into one of these smaller teams, you'll be pretty surprised by the amount of remarkable players that are on this team and the amount of players that won't play in the NFL that still look incredible on the field, because there are a lot of just remarkable players across the sport that just don't quite stack up to the insanity that we see every Saturday. But I think this is always a very fun talking point during the offseason. Always gives us something to get a little contentious over and get mad at each other over. But I'll do my best to give a top 10 later in the show. I think I did a pretty solid job, but I'm sure there will be people that totally disagree with me. But stay tuned for that later in the show. But we're going to take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about spring games. We got into some of them yesterday, UGA, LSU, some others, but want to break down the rest of them for you. We have Penn State, Bama, Tennessee, Miami, and Utah coming up, so stick with us, and we will be right back with that.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit. A stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the top 100 list that came out from CBS, as you can see on the bottom there, but we're going to jump into spring game takeaways now, and there is so much to get to. We're going to start in Penn State and kind of work our way through Bama, Tennessee, Miami, and then Utah to finish it off, so tons to get to. We might have one more of these segments throughout the week, but not exactly sure. Still kind of breaking down all the spring games and what was worth taking away from, what was not, kind of type of thing. But Penn State was a very interesting one. It all started with Keandre Lambert-Smith. We have seen him enter the portal since this game, but he was someone that was just not present, and a lot of Penn State fans expected him to be leading into this day, but the wide receiver group in general was not necessarily awe-inspiring in this game. I think Julian Fleming had a solid day, but not necessarily what you wanted. There was a ton of wind, so it was a relatively sloppy game throwing the ball with Drew Aller and these wide receivers, but at the end of the day, it's really hard to fault them for that too much because of the conditions that they were playing under. But obviously, you're going to have to play and win. So it's going to be interesting to see this Penn State team develop. No Nicholas Singleton or Katron Allen in this game, but Cam Wallace did play. He's the third string around there, and they love this kid. He had a very, very good day. This is going to be a run-heavy offense. Andy Kotelnicki has made that very clear over his time at Kansas, and I think it gives them the opportunity to have a ton of different bodies at running back, and Cam Wallace definitely needed these reps more than Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, so very good to see him out there, and I think they have three guys now that they can go to pretty much at any point and feel very confident in. That's a huge help to a team that is going to be running the ball probably about 60 to 66% of the time, I would assume, this upcoming year. The O-line looked solid for how many guys that they're losing and replacing through different measures. I think this O-line is still a lot up in the air for sure, but I think if you're going to see them this early on and they look that good, I think you feel pretty good as a Nittany Lions fan. And then the defense overall, it's going to be good. I'm not necessarily worried about that. They've been good since James Franklin has been there. He's recruited very well, and now they have Tom Allen in the door, and he's a fantastic defensive mind, a guy that can put together a lot more with a lot less. And he has one of the best players in the country in Abdul Carter, in my opinion. He moved to edge this offseason from the linebacker position, kind of taking over for Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac, the two guys that were huge forces on that edge for Penn State last year, but Abdul Carter might be the best athlete of the three, and I know that sounds crazy with the athlete that Chop Robinson is, but Abdul Carter is an absolute difference maker, and giving him the ability to play edge, and then if you need to move him back to linebacker, you can. He has the ability to essentially do whatever he wants on the field, which is a luxury that not many people have, and I think he's going to be a total difference maker for this defense throughout the year. But I think this was a spring game that I think a lot of us didn't take too much from necessarily. I think we all know they need wide receiver help. That became even more apparent with Lambert Smith finding his way into the portal. But I think this overall, this team is exactly how I expected them to look. This defense is going to be dominant. This offense is going to be run heavy, and then Drew Allers just kind of have to pick his moments. He was not necessarily great in this game by any means, but the wind really did hurt him and didn't necessarily give him much of a fighting shot. Also, some drops that were just really tough. So I think overall, this is a game that we won't really know a ton about Penn State until games really start. I think Drew Allers, the big question mark in all of this, he has not necessarily taken the massive leaps that Penn State fans were hoping for, but at the end of the day, the talent is there, the ability is there, so maybe it'll all open up in fall, who knows, but overall, this game, you kind of got what you expected for the most part. Cam Wallace was the one part of this that I thought was really interesting and definitely gives them a really good running back stable heading into this upcoming year. But let's move on to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and talk about the Crimson Tide. The first spring game without Nick Saban at the helm had to be a little bit weird for Bama fans, but there were tons there, about 72,000 fans in attendance, so they were very excited for this game, obviously, to see the guys the first time under Kalen DeBoer. A lot on the table for sure, and a lot of criticism and a lot of compliments definitely were on the table this Saturday, but Jalen Milroe, I feel like, got a lot of compliments throughout the day. He made a ton of NFL-level throws that you didn't really see from him last year. He made a beautiful throw to Jeremy Bernard kind of across the field on a crossing route that I thought was just incredible. It was a throw that he doesn't make last year, to be totally honest with you. He either overshoots him or underthrows it and it gets picked or something happens, right? So him being able to make those throws is a total difference maker for this team going forward and gives this wide receiver group that might not be the most talented in the world. They needed a quarterback that can, put the ball on them pretty much every time, and it looks like Jalen Milroe is slowly taking those steps towards making those plays. But the running backs were the people that kind of stole the show here. They combined for 4 touchdowns between Jamarian Miller, Richard Young, and Justice Haynes. Jamarian Miller was the MVP of the game, so he was the one that kind of stole the show. He was just incredible throughout the day. Richard Young had a very aggressive touchdown run later in the day, and Justice Haynes is Justice Haynes. He's the one that I have literally zero questions about. I think he's going to be an absolute difference maker. It might be Jamario Miller to start the year, to be totally honest with you, but Justice Haynes and Richard Young will get plenty of run. I think that's the ability of having three running backs that are among probably the top 30 or 40 in the entire country. You have the ability to rotate them in and out, keep this defense on its heels, and really just impose your will. So I think what we expected to see from Bama last year with running the ball a ton and kind of dominating people on the inside, I think we could very well see that this year with the guards they have and with these running back talent. It's just going to be a lot of run plays, a lot of aggression from that offense, I would assume, early and often, to be totally honest with you, even with Kalen DeBoer and Nick Sheridan being the ones kind of pulling the strings over there. But defense is going to be very interesting to watch over the next couple of weeks. I think that back end needs to be filled out a little bit more. The young players have been playing well. Xavier Brown, Jalen Makuba, I think both those guys have played really solid. But at the end of the day, you probably need a little bit more experience back there. You probably need a couple more, big-time players. So I expect them to be very active in the portal. I think they could be probably one of the most active teams in the portal in the entire country, which we'll actually get to here in the next segment. But I think overall, Bama is in a position where nothing is really off the table. Obviously, they have quarterback taken care of. They have linebackers. They have offensive linemen coming in, although they might need a right tackle to help out as well. So it'll be really interesting to see this team kind of develop. I think it'll be a slightly different starting 22 by this time in 2 weeks than it is right now. But at the end of the day, Bama right now looks pretty good, all things considered, and I think they'll only get better throughout the time. But one of the things that is still up in the air and should really worry Bama fans is that kicker position. Connor Talty was supposed to be the guy throughout spring that was thought to be the guy, but multiple kickers tried extra points and field goals. Talty did miss a field goal throughout the game, so not necessarily the greatest showing from the guy that they expected to be the place kicker this upcoming year, and Bama fans know too well that can be a huge difference maker for a year. Will Reichard was an absolute godsend for Bama fans after a long time of just not having a very good kicking game. So hopefully they can figure that out, because as of right now, it looks like they don't have anyone pegged as the starting kicker over there. But let's move right along to Tennessee, and let's talk about this wide receiver group, because they were the people that absolutely stole the show. We had long touchdowns from Mike Matthews, the very talented freshman out of Parkview High School in Georgia. We had Chaz Nimrod with long touchdown catches. Jake Merklinger, the talented freshman quarterback, was someone that really looked good throughout this game. Definitely someone that Tennessee fans can be very excited for in the future. We'll have a couple of years to kind of learn the offense as Iamaliava goes through his time in Knoxville. But at the end of the day, this is a kid that is going to be very, very talented in the future and has the ability to keep that good quarterback rolling at Tennessee. Hopefully Nico can kind of set that off on the right foot this year. But Nico overall looked really solid. He had the touchdown to Chaz Nimrod, had a number of really, really good plays, but didn't necessarily light it up the way that Tennessee fans wanted, but was still very solid and answered a lot of the questions that people had. So I think he did plenty in this game. The defense was definitely disruptive up front. There were some O-line injuries, so not sure how much that kind of played a part in this, but the defense overall will be on the lookout for the right guys, especially on the back end of that defense. I feel like they have a good group there. I think they could definitely use a couple more guys just to make it more solid throughout this offseason. So these next couple of weeks will be very interesting on the defensive side of the ball for Tennessee. I think they'll be one of the teams that is very active in terms of just finding guys that fit, just finding pretty much any position that can be a difference maker for them in Saturdays in the fall, because they have a lot of openings, to be totally honest with you, minus those edge rushing positions and some of the D-line positions. I think there's a lot of opening on that defense for just any player that can, make plays for them. So we'll see what happens there. But let's move on to Miami and let's talk about Cam Ward. He has totally taken over this team. I think a lot of people, when he came in a little bit later in the process because he flirted with the NFL draft and that type of thing. And excuse me, I think there was some question about his ability to, take the bull by the horns, be the leader of this team. But I don't think that's much of a question anymore. This is very obviously his team. He had a really, really good day, went 19 for 24, 324 yards, had at least one touchdown to Xavier Restrepo. Restrepo, and Jacoby George seem to be on the same page, which is absolutely huge for this offense's success. And the offense won the day pretty comfortably, which is what I think all of us expected. This secondary really struggled, which is something that they really have to worry about. Losing guys like Cam Kitchens and James Williams on that back end is not an easy thing to replace, point blank period. So it'll be really interesting to see if they add guys through the portal. I think they will be very active in the portal, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and maybe even running back, which we'll talk about here later. But I think it's a very interesting team that just needs some help on the defensive side of the ball. So I would expect some portal influx, at least in the next couple of weeks. One guy that kind of popped up that maybe people weren't expecting, or if you're a Hurricane fan, you already knew the name, but Elijah Lofton, a tight end who just came in this spring, had a big day. He's someone that looks really smooth on the field, is a great pass catcher, and could be one of the other, incredible weapons that they have on this team. I think they could be even after another wide receiver in all of this, but we'll see what happens with Miami. I think they could be a total difference maker in all of this transfer portal the next couple of weeks. I think overall the defense, they're very much hit or miss. They made a couple of plays in the second half, forced some turnovers, but didn't necessarily do the things you wanted them to do on a consistent basis. So I would expect them to be kind of the area that changes the most over the next couple of weeks for Miami. But overall, a very solid showing, but the defense definitely does need help down there. But let's move on to Utah, and let's talk about Cam Rising and Dorian Singer. Cam Rising is finally healthy. It feels like we were waiting a million years last year for him to be healthy. It was just every single week you were waiting for that tweet to come through that said he was healthy, and it never came. So, but he's finally healthy. He's finally looking the part again, and him and Dorian Singer seem to be on the same page, which is huge news for them. That is a duo that I had in the top 10 of my quarterback wide receiver duos going into this year, and it seems like it's rolling early. So it's definitely something that they're going to need if they want to win the Big 12 in year one, if they want to be the team that a lot of people expect them to be. So it'll be really interesting to watch. Zach Wilson's brother, Isaac, had a big-time day. He looked like an absolute dude in this game, and I think the quarterback position is in a little bit better shape than I thought it was, honestly, going forward. He went 6 for 8, 115 yards, 2 touchdowns. So about as good as you can possibly do. Definitely gave him a huge boost in the backup quarterback battle, and we might have to see him. Cam Rising has had a little bit of injury trouble throughout his time, and hopefully he doesn't this year, but you always got to be ready for it. So definitely a great option for them at backup quarterback. It'll be interesting to see if we see him much throughout the year. But one guy that popped up on the defensive side of the ball is Cam Coleman, the cornerback that came over from Michigan, a guy that is an absolute game changer. He's someone they absolutely need on that back end. I talked about Teo Johnson a couple of times on here. He's going to be great, but he needs other people around him, and it feels like Cam Calhoun is really becoming that guy. So very, very excited for this back end of this defense. I knew that Kyle Whittingham was going to put it together, but it's going to be interesting to see who those guys are and who the difference makers really are at the end of the day. But Utah was very pass heavy on Saturday, which is not something you really expect to see. I think it's very possible that they're pass heavy with the wide receivers they have and Cam Rising being in full control of that offense, but it definitely could be a sign that they need some running back help in the portal. They lost Jaquindon Jackson, who had a great day in Arkansas Spring Day this past weekend, but they definitely need some help at running back. Micah Bernard is still there, but need some more for sure. Jalen Glover as well. But I think that's a position definitely to watch for Utah as we kind of go in. There's going to be plenty of talented running backs, that's for sure. But I like this team a lot. They continue to improve with Cam Rising coming back. The floor was always going to be high, and the ceiling is going to be even higher. So very, very excited to see what this team can do. I think they're going to be in an absolute battle in the Big 12. I think them and Kansas State will really be vying for that top spot, but plenty of other teams right behind them. So Utah is kind of setting the pace right now, but plenty of teams will have plenty to say about that. But we're going to take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Chris Hummer's transfer portal superlatives. He gave out some teams to watch, some positions to watch. Just want to break that down for you guys, and some players that have already kind of joined the conversation here, only a couple hours into the transfer portal era. But we will break that down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a little bit of intel from the spring games this past weekend, some takeaways from all the games we weren't able to break down on Monday, but let's get to some transfer portal superlatives. Chris Hummer over at CBS dropped his superlatives as we move into this spring portal window, and there's a lot to break down, to be totally honest with you. But let's start with the team that he thinks could define the cycle, and I totally agree with him. It is Alabama. This team is not Kalen DeBoer's team yet. Obviously, he loves the guys in that room and doesn't necessarily hold any grudges against anyone by any means, but he's still in the process of building out this team as he sees fit. He's still building out this team the way he wants it and the way he pictures it in his head. So there's going to be a lot of movement both ways, I think. I think there were some guys that stuck around to see what this Kalen DeBoer era was going to look like. Some aren't going to like it. Some are going to leave because of depth chart issues. There's going to be a lot of stuff happening around Tuscaloosa, Alabama. They're going to go after cornerbacks and wide receivers. I think will be the main focus as they hunt for new players. But I think defensive tackle is a position to watch. They need an offensive tackle to help as well, with Caden Proctor probably coming back. Maybe even a tight end. I think they could be just insanely active. So if the right player comes along, Bama will definitely at least touch base and see what the interest level is, and it could be a very different Bama team, to be totally honest with you, this time in a couple of weeks. But we'll see what happens. I think Bama is always going to be a team that defines pretty much any cycle, whether it's recruiting or transfer portal, but especially this one, I think they'll be very active, both players coming into the program and players walking out of it. But that'll be really interesting to watch. I think everyone knows that Bama's in kind of a transition period right now, and they will be over the next 2 weeks, that's for sure. But he got to the next one is a top 25 team with the most work to do. Excuse me. And this one is very clear. It's Washington. There's no question about that. This is a team that definitely took the biggest hit in terms of guys leaving their program. I think they didn't have the ability to necessarily backfill the way Alabama did with Kalen DeBoer's guys from Washington, because not a lot of guys followed from Arizona. Now, the door is still open, obviously, as this portal window starts. I mean, Noah Fafita and Tatoria McMillan are going to be guys that they're going to be watching very closely down in Tucson. But at the end of the day, right now, it feels like Washington is not nearly the same team they were a year ago. It looks like a totally different team, and it pretty much is, to be totally honest with you. Will Rogers is the quarterback down there, a guy that is not shy about throwing the ball, is not uncomfortable in pretty much any situation. So at the very least, have a very high floor out there. I think it'll be really interesting to see how that position, develops, to be totally honest with you. If Noah Fafita finds his way to Washington, that'll be his position to be had, but obviously that hasn't happened yet. So Will Rogers is the guy. It'll be really interesting to see how they fill out the rest of this group, because pretty much every position is on the board. Even that quarterback position, honestly, depending on how Will Rogers has played throughout spring, could be on the board. So this Washington team that we see right now is not going to be the Washington team we see in fall. So it'll be really interesting to see that kind of develop over the next couple of weeks, because it's going to be a lot of action over there in Seattle. But then you got to the most in-demand position, and it's defensive tackle, and there's no question about that. There is going to be people all over the country that need interior defensive line help. UGA, Texas, Bama, and so many more are going to need really big-time help. LSU is another one that definitely needs help. Now, Texas might have had some answers to theirs. Bill Norton is a guy from Arizona that seems to be heading to Texas. He got a crystal ball earlier this week to go to Texas, so it'll be interesting to see if that happens and how quickly that happens. Jermaine Lowell from Louisville is another guy to watch. Anthony Dunn Jr. from Florida A&M was an absolute game changer in the SWAC last year, and I think he will be getting calls from plenty of big teams. Chaz Wallace has left Colorado, who is a D lineman that has tons of experience behind him, so there will be plenty of names, but overall, the supply will not meet the demand. There are so many teams that need help, and there are not enough guys, to be totally honest with you. So there will be some teams that are very happy they got the guy they did. There will be some teams that are left with the guys that they have right now, and it'll be interesting to see who those teams are and kind of how they adapt to that, because defensive tackle is going to be pretty much as many teams as you can name in the country are going to be after a defensive tackle in this class, but very few are solid at that position. Pretty much Ohio State, Michigan, and not many else, to be totally honest with you. But and then we get to the least in-demand position, and quarterback is definitely the answer here. There's no doubt about that. I think there's not many open spots around the country. Northwestern is one that I think the starting quarterback position is still very much up for grabs, but overall, it's depth positions, at least if you want to go Power 5. So you have, I think UGA is going to add one more guy to that room. Not exactly sure where that's going to come from, but you have UCLA, Iowa, and Texas Tech. All could be looking for depth position as well, but also those starting positions aren't necessarily locked down by any means. So it'll be interesting to see if someone jumps in there and takes over the starting job at those three, but obviously UGA's is locked down. Northwestern's is wide open, and maybe there are a couple that are a little bit more open than we assume that they are right now. But one that might be open but doesn't seem like it is right now, to be totally honest with you, is Michigan. He says they are the team that could jumpstart the quarterback market in terms of some of these guys coming off the board. Now, I think overall there won't be a big-time quarterback that jumps in. Now, I might be eating my words here in a couple of days, but I think Michigan, for the time being, feels pretty comfortable with Alex Orji. I think he's made the strides that they were hoping for him to make, and I think at most they'll be looking for a backup quarterback, but who knows? You never really know what that thing looks like. This Saturday will be very interesting to watch to get an idea of where these quarterbacks sit, but right now, you have guys like Nick Evers and Jacoby Criswell in the portal. Neither of those guys are starting quarterbacks at Michigan necessarily. So I think as for the time being, at least, they'll mostly be looking for a backup. But who knows? Depending on how things go Saturday, maybe they're looking for a starter this time next week. But we'll definitely be watching that very closely. The position with the most big names, according to Chris Hummer and pretty much according to everyone, to be totally honest with you, is running back. We saw Damian Martinez jump in. He's the biggest name pretty comfortably on the running back market right now, but there's so many guys right behind him. Henry Parrish is a really good player from Miami that's entering the portal. I think he's been crystal balled to Ole Miss, so something to watch there. And then you have Andrew Paul, who is pretty much a four-stringer, to be totally honest with you, at Georgia, but is an absolute beast. We saw him running on Saturday in the spring game, and the dude runs mean. It was a little bit of a audition for some other teams. Now, he cannot go in the SEC, which is something we'll get to here in a second, but definitely a guy that a lot of teams will be after, and there are some big-time teams that need some running back help, so it'll be interesting to watch that. I think overall there will be more guys to come, and we'll see that kind of build out over the next couple of weeks, but Miami is a team to watch that needs running back help. Ole Miss, we talked about. I think Henry Parrish was crystal balled there, but we'll definitely watch that as more guys go in, because I know Ole Miss is calling Damian Martinez for sure, and Miami the same. So it'll be interesting to see that develop and where all these guys fall, because there are a lot of really, really good running back names in the portal right now. The team that could potentially make a big splash, he has Miami. I might have leaned Ole Miss, although I think Miami is right there with them. I think they'll be very, very active in the cycle. I think Ole Miss will be very active because that's who Lane Kiffin is, right? But there's plenty of holes on this Miami defense, especially they have plenty of NIL to foot the bill for a lot of big-time players, so it'll be really interesting to see if Miami can maybe get one of the bigger players in this portal, because there are going to be a ton of guys that we do not expect to jump in that end up jumping in, and Miami will definitely be a very interesting prospect for a lot of those players. So especially SEC players that cannot go in conference, which is the next superlative here. Conference that most upset with its own rules, the SEC. No SEC player can transfer in conference, so Andrew Paul cannot go to Ole Miss, which is something definitely to watch throughout this process. Obviously, SEC teams would love to keep SEC players. They definitely want to be going after the guys leaving Alabama, the guys leaving Georgia, whatever, what have you. But at the end of the day, they can't, at least in this portal cycle. So it'll be interesting to see kind of the strategy of some of these SEC teams. Maybe they're a little bit quieter than some people expect, just because the right players aren't necessarily on the table for them, but we'll see that develop, and it'll definitely be interesting to see, especially a team like Alabama, who needs to do a ton of work. We'll see kind of how they work that out. But teams doing spring cleaning was the next one, and he has everyone, and he is absolutely right. There are extra scholarship players on so many rosters right now. I know Texas had a couple heading into the spring that I think have been worked out by now, honestly, in the portal, but I think there's a ton more that have over the amount of scholarship players they're supposed to have. Right now it's at 85, so a lot of teams have 88, they have 90, they have whatever the number is, and you can't go into this season with that. So it'll be really interesting to see that kind of develop over the next couple of weeks. Some guys might be asked to leave. Some guys might find places to go play with depth chart issues or whatever. But it'll be really interesting to see kind of the roster management that goes on the next couple of weeks. But finally, he had a team that could surprise some people, and he had Mississippi State. This is an interesting one that, to be honest, I hadn't thought about a ton. Jeff Lebby is coming in there as their new head coach, and that offense is really fun to run. I won't lie to you. So I think there's going to be a ton of people looking at that as a really viable option, especially offensive talents out there. I think this offense, they're going to be throwing it a lot, so wide receivers, quarterbacks, I think they'll be all over the place with a ton of different positions, but especially on the offensive side of the ball, I think Jeff Lebby has an ability to pull in some guys that maybe some people don't expect. So Mississippi State will definitely be a team we'll keep an eye out on. Maybe they can build out, a team that can compete in the SEC this next year, which would be very interesting. But overall, this is going to be a crazy portal window. I think this is going to be one of the crazier ones that we can remember, but it's just starting. So we'll keep you updated as we go. We'll probably have a segment tomorrow just breaking down where we are with all of the names that are in, and then we'll keep updating that throughout the next 2 weeks because it's going to be wild. But we're going to take our final break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about a new Top 10 Tuesday. I gave my best players in the country earlier. We did the top 100 players in the country. I only did 10 just to spare myself a little bit here, but it is not an easy thing to put together. So spare me a little bit, but we're going to take our final break, and we'll be right back with that. So stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some transfer portal superlatives that Chris Hummer over at CBS put out, kind of broke down what some teams are looking for, some positions that everyone should be watching throughout that time, but now it's time for a Top 10 Tuesday, and I am giving my best players in the country as of this second. This is not an easy thing to put together, so spare me a little bit, but it'll be an interesting list, and I'm sure everyone will totally agree with me 100%, but this is the top 10 as I have it right now. To start it off, I do have Caleb Downs at number 1. Now, that might be a little bit of a projection into who I think he can be, but we saw it last year. A guy leading Alabama in tackles as a freshman is not something we see very often. He is an absolute difference maker. He is someone that can do so many different things, and transferring over to Ohio State, he is in a room that is absolutely loaded, but he is the best guy in that room by a pretty comfortable margin. So I think he's someone that totally transforms pretty much any defense he's on. I think he is someone that Alabama would have loved to keep in Tuscaloosa, but wasn't quite able to, and I think he'll only continue to improve through the next 2 years. I think he could be one of the highest taken safeties off the board when he eventually goes into the draft, because the dude is just so dynamic in so many different ways. Number 2, I actually had the same thing that Blake Brockermeyer had. I do have James Pierce Jr. as the second best player in the country. I think he's a total difference maker on the edge for Tennessee. I think he will only get better as a pass rusher, but totally dominant, one of the most impactful players in the entire country. He is one of the few non-quarterbacks in my mind that can go number 1 overall next year. I think there are a couple on this list that we'll get to throughout as we go through it, but I think James Pierce Jr. kind of leads that, right? There are so many guys that are looking for a dominant edge rusher, and if he was in this class, he might be the number 1 edge rusher taken off the board, to be totally honest with you. So I think he's a total difference maker. He's only going to get better, and this year is going to be very special for James Pierce Jr., if I had to imagine. At 3, I do have Travis Hunter. He's a game changer. There's no two ways about it. Probably the best athlete in the entire country. He is simultaneously one of the best corners and one of the best wide receivers in the country. So it's just remarkable what he can do on a football field. Essentially has free reign to do whatever he wants, and he absolutely should. He is another guy that could go number 1 overall if the chips fall his way. There's been some news around that with Deion Sanders dropping the 6 teams that he's quote-unquote allowed to go to, but we'll break that down later in the week and kind of get into that a little bit. But he's someone that's a total difference maker for this team all over the field. Obviously, a difference maker on the defensive side of the ball, but what he's able to do on the offensive side just shouldn't be allowed with how good he is at corner. Him being that good at wide receiver is just unfair. But at number 4, I do have Will Campbell. He is the best O-lineman in the country in my mind. He is going to be an absolute beast when he gets to the next level, but since he touched the field as a freshman, he's been incredible. He's only gotten better, but even when he was a freshman, you looked at this kid and just thought he looked different. So it'll be really interesting to see if he can go number 1 overall next year. I think he absolutely can. If the Panthers repeat as the top pick this upcoming year, I think I wouldn't be surprised at all if they went after Campbell. They need a guy to help out with Bryce Young, especially on that blind side, and Will Campbell would be a great pick if the Panthers were in that position again. So definitely something to watch as the next season of the NFL kind of unfolds and we see what the draft is going to look like. But Mason Graham is at 5 for me. This dude's a force. He is just insane. He's going to change games for Michigan pretty much week in, week out, is an elite run defender, which is something that Michigan has kind of hung their hat on for quite some time now, but it might be the best it's been in quite some time this year. I think him and Kenneth Grant in the middle there is one of the best duos in the country, probably the best duo in the entire country. They'll be the focal point of this defense. Obviously, last year you had guys littered around this defense all over the place, but now Mason Graham and Will Johnson are kind of the guys pulling a lot of the weight. So it'll be interesting to see how he kind of steps into that role and how dominant he can be. But this guy is going to change games for Michigan all year and will definitely give their offense a little bit of leeway to kind of find their way as this new quarterback takes over and all of the new things happen over there. But at 6, I do have Luther Burden around the same place I believe that Brockermeyer had him. And this guy is just insane. I think he's the best wide receiver in the country. He's just been incredible to watch throughout his career. A lot of people, when he committed to Missouri, thought he would be finding a new place to play in, a year after that. And he stayed put. They've only gotten better since he's been there. And he's someone that totally changes the complexion of that team pretty much overnight. So I think he will definitely be the top wide receiver off the board next year. I think he definitely could be one of the best players in the entire class, to be totally honest with you. So it'll be really interesting to see him develop over this last year. He's already shown us plenty, to be totally honest with you, but I think he still has more in his bag to show us. So I'd be really excited to see what happens with him. At 7, I do have Carson Beck. I think he's the best quarterback in the country. I totally understand why people have Shedeur Sanders or Jalen Milroe over him, but at the end of the day, I feel so good about this kid going into next year. I think he's going to light the world on fire. He has so many weapons to throw to. He puts the ball pretty much wherever he wants it. On a rope, so he's someone definitely to watch. He is currently my pick to be the number 1 overall pick next year, just because that tends to go to a quarterback, and I expect him to be the top quarterback in the country next year. I think a Heisman is definitely in the cards for him, and could be on the way with how that offense is looking early on in the spring and early on in the offseason. But definitely much more to develop there, but I just love this kid. I think he's an absolute game changer and one of the best pure throwers of the football I've seen, at the very least since Joe Burrow was in LSU in 2019. But at the 8 position, I do have Kelvin Banks, the other offensive lineman, just a touch below Will Campbell, to be totally honest with you. Both of them have been great since they've been freshmen, but Will Campbell was just a little bit sooner to get all the kinks worked out and kind of become that dominant force on the offensive line. I think both the guys could be top 10 picks next year and will be huge for both their quarterbacks. So Kelvin Banks is incredible. He's been incredible since he stepped on the field at Texas, and Quinn Ewers is definitely very happy to have Kelvin Banks protecting his blind side throughout his time at Texas. But to round it out here, at 9, we have Tatorian McMillan, the remarkable wide receiver from Arizona right now. Just a touch below Luther Burden to me. They both do just incredible things, are incredibly built, do so many remarkable things on the football field. So you can line him up all over the field. He is going to be a matchup nightmare. And I think him and Noah Fafita being in lockstep is a huge win for him, because there's a world where he is the most productive wide receiver in the country, and then maybe the scales tip in his favor, because I think him and Luther Burden are really fighting for that top wide receiver spot, and the gap is not super wide, so it'll be really interesting to see what happens there throughout the season. And then to round it out, I have Abdul Carter. I think this dude is one of the best athletes in the country. I might only put him second to Travis Hunter, to be totally honest with you. The size and the speed is just insane. I think him coming off the edge is a great decision by this Penn State coaching staff. I think that adds a certain dynamic to their defense that they have had in the past necessarily, but they haven't quite, hit the massive potential, I suppose, that they could have. I think Chop Robinson was just remarkable. I think Abdul Carter could be even better, and be a guy that they just drafted as a defensive player next year, to be totally honest with you. Just draft him and let him just kind of play defense and do whatever he wants. So would be very interested to see how that kind of develops throughout the year. I think he's going to be a total difference maker for this Penn State team throughout the year, and it'll be really, really interesting to watch him kind of state his claim, I suppose, at edge rushing. Is he drafted as an edge rusher? Is he drafted as a linebacker? Is he just drafted as a dude? And you just kind of let him do his thing. We'll find out, but I think he definitely could be the top defender taken off the board next year, especially with the season I expect to have for him. But some honorable mentions here that could definitely give Abdul Carter a run for his money. Will Johnson, Harold Perkins, Malachi Starks, all remarkable defensive players that can do just insane things this upcoming year. And then I had Quinn Ewers just off the list as well. He, in my opinion, is the second best quarterback in the country and has the ability to kind of hit a new level this upcoming year. So I think all those guys, you could rank them pretty much any order you want. I'm sure there are plenty of people that do not agree with this list right here, but it's really tough to put together a top 10 player in the country list, especially in a year like this with so much talent littered across the country that it's really hard to sparse through it all and make sure that you have the right guys. But at the end of the day, I feel pretty good about my top 10. I think it's really hard to put together, but at the end of the day, having the guys that I have, I feel pretty secure in that. But definitely let me know what you think about that. Let me know what your top 10 is if you want to take a crack at it. But that will do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for content and updates. We have so many people covering pretty much every sport you could think of, whether you're a baseball fan, football fan, a wrestling fan, it doesn't matter. So we have it all covered for you. We have a new women's sports podcast that is going to be launching here very soon, so definitely check that out when you have a chance. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Let's go.